so that they are translated into spiritual food, spiritual water, that it would quench our hearts and transform our minds. And we pray these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. If you got your Bibles, excuse me, turn to 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. The thing I love about expository is that you can't blame me for picking easy verses or hard verses. We're just kind of going through the book. And so we find ourselves in verse 15. Let's begin at verse 13, but we're going to study 15. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. Verse 15, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. Let me, just because some of us have different translations, let me read the same passage out of the New International Version, the English Standard Version, and the King James. International says it this way, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that is in you. But do this with gentleness and respect. The English Standard Version says, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And the New King James says this, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. The teaching today is about a word that most of you fear more than any other word that I could teach, and it's called evangelism. This passage is about how do we share the good news of that which we believe with those around us. And evangelism scares us in ways that are unimaginable. Some of us have never shared the gospel of Jesus Christ with anyone for many reasons. Some of us are afraid that we'll do it wrong, and if we do it wrong, they're going to go to hell, then it's our fault. Some of us don't do it because we're afraid that they're going to ask us a question that we can't answer. Some of us do it because we don't think it's our responsibility. It's the pastor's responsibility. It was Billy Graham's responsibility, but not my responsibility. The early church did not spread the gospel through bumper stickers. They didn't go out and put fishes on the rear side of their chariot to somehow communicate Jesus Christ to a lost world. They didn't create billboards. When I was living in Tahoe, I went to Reno a lot to fly, and there was this series of billboards, one after another, that all had a part of the gospel, and I would see that on 395 most every week. God didn't intend for us as Christians to go and buy billboards. He wants us to be the billboard. He wants us to be the living billboard that causes people, when they see us, to see some part of the gospel of Jesus Christ and be intrigued by it. That it was always people that was a part. A while back, I was driving through Maui, and I was driving down this 2-lane road, and I saw a sign. I don't know what it was, a half a mile down the road, and this large sign, and it said this, noon. I drove another quarter of a mile, same sign, got a little bit, noon. I thought, what is that about? And I came up to the sign and was over a church. And the sign, when you got really, really, really close to it, said this, Jesus is coming soon. But it was decaying. It was falling apart. It was peeling. Noon. And at first I started to laugh. I go, wow, and it's ironic. The very sign that tells us that Jesus is coming soon is the very sign that's falling apart. That's classic. And then I thought, how many of us, me, are a living sign that doesn't clearly say Jesus is coming soon, but is saying noon. Because our faith is peeling, our life is decaying, the light and the salt that we once had has lost its light and it's lost its saltiness. People are going to teach you different things about evangelism. We had Reed in here yesterday. I love Reed. I admire him. I support him 100% in what he teaches. What I'm going to teach primarily is what Peter talks about when he talks about evangelism. So here's what I want you to hear. I believe that Jesus always called us to a lifestyle of evangelism that demonstrated the truth of the gospel and expected us to live that truth before we spoke that truth. And the reason he wanted us to live that truth before we spoke that truth is he wanted us to stay away from cliches. And people who are not living the truth, when they share the gospel, speak in terms of cliches. They speak in terms of hypocrisy. They speak out of phoniness. And there's this disconnect. In my experience, most people who turn down the gospel that someone preaches to them doesn't turn down the gospel. They turn down the gospel lived out in the person who's telling them the gospel. That's why Jesus in Matthew 6 tells us we are to be a light on a hill. We are to be salt. And because we are light and because we are salt, people will glorify God. Meaning, salt and light are both silent, but they're transforming. And Jesus wanted our life to be transforming. He wanted us to be first salt and then light, and out of the goodness of our lives, draw people to us. So here's my teaching today in a statement. My teaching is this: without Christ as Lord of your life and my life will never cause anybody to ask us any questions about our hope and faith. Without Jesus as Lord of your life, there will be no reason for anyone to ask you anything about your faith or your hope, because you're going to look just like them. But when Jesus becomes Lord of our lives, something begins to transform. So let's look at 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, and see what Peter, the great evangelist, the one who spoke and thousands came to know Christ, what his instructions to us as believers are. Verse 15, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Sanctify him, set him apart, revere him, honor him, submit to him, be instructed by him, be guided by him. Allow his authority to take control of your life. Make him over you. That's the first responsibility you have. in evangelism. Your first responsibility is not to go into a lost world. Your first responsibility isn't to share Jesus in the marketplace. Your first responsibility is to set Christ as Lord of your life. Make him over you. Submit to him. Live in obedience to him. See him as boss, Lord, CEO, king, whatever the word is. Place yourself under him. And when we place ourselves under his authority, when we live according to his authority, there is a transformation that begins to happen in our lives. And I'm going to suggest the times in my life where Jesus isn't Lord are the times in my life that I'm not being transformed. And the times in my life I make him Lord, I obey him, no matter what the consequences are. He begins to transform me in ways unimaginable. Let me put it in a couple of analogies. I think within us all is a throne. And there's one of two people on that throne. There's me, or there's Jesus. But somebody's going to be on the throne. And when Peter says, I want you to set apart Christ as Lord, he is saying, I want you to get off the throne of your life. Get off and allow him to be on the throne and allow him to be king and honor him as king by obeying him. And when you set your part Christ as Lord of your life or Lord of your heart, when he is on the throne, your life is different. So here's the question. Who was on the throne most in your life this last week? Who sat here? You or him? And Peter would say, make it him. Let me give it to you in another analogy. Think of a square. And in the square, think of different boxes that are different parts of your life. There's your finances, there's your marriage, there's your friends, there's your hobbies, there's your goals, there's your dreams. Put them all there, different boxes representing different parts of your life inside of this big box called your life. And what many of us do is one of those boxes, one of them is called religion, faith, or Jesus. And we work hard to make that box really nice. We come to church, we may have devotions, we may read our Bible, and we do everything people tell us to do to make that little square within the big square as influential as it possibly can. But in truth, it's just a compartmentalized faith. We just put Jesus in this little box, and we try to make the box as big as we can, but it's still a box, and it doesn't really influence our marriage, and it doesn't influence our finances, it doesn't influence our dreams, it doesn't influence our workplace, it doesn't do anything other than that box looks really good. But I don't think that's what Jesus calls us to. Think of the same square, but instead of boxes and Jesus having one little box, faith, religion, whatever you want to do, think of the center of that square being a circle. And in the center of that circle, put Jesus or faith. And then what I believe the Christian life is about is allowing Jesus to become Lord of more and more boxes, of more and more parts of my life. That Jesus' lordship is not something I talk about in church. Jesus' lordship that influences my marriage and how I respond to my spouse. Jesus' influence as it grows, as he becomes Lord of more areas of my life, influences my finances. It influences how I spend my time. It influences how I live out his commandment. It becomes something that in my life starts like this, but as I grow in maturity, he becomes more influential of all of my life, and therefore the whole square is under his influence, not just a little box over here. And when you get out of the little box and you put him in the center and you allow him to influence you more, it changes everything. It changes your relationship. It changes your dreams. It changes your responses to suffering. Because these people are suffering. These people are not suffering because they did something wrong. They're suffering because they're Christians. And then all of a sudden Peter comes along and says, in the midst of your suffering, set apart Christ as Lord. Don't set him as Lord when everything is going well and easy, which is kind of easy and what we tend to want to do. If I make Jesus Lord, then everything's going to work out right. Right, Bill, isn't it? And I say, no, not necessarily. Let me tell you now, no. I can tell you in 1 Peter that these people, by setting apart Christ as Lord, didn't make their lives any easier. It made their lives better, but it didn't make it easier. It made their lives richer, didn't make it easier. It made their lives more transforming, but it didn't make it easier. Let's go to a third analogy. We got the throne, we got the square, we got the house. I think most of us find it easy when we invite Jesus into our hearts. We invite him. There's a book entitled My Heart, Christ's Home, pamphlet. And it basically says we tend to invite Jesus into our heart, our home, and we ask him to stay in the living room. That's yours. But that's all that's yours. I got it really clean. It's been vacuumed. I even got new furniture for you. There you go. And the problem with Jesus is, as Lord, he kind of looks around and he says, what's down there? None of your, not important, Jesus. Not important. You want some cookies? I got the big screen for you. How's that? He goes, what's down there? And you say, well, there's a kitchen down there. And he walks into the kitchen and he looks at your kitchen and he looks at that and he says, I want to be a part of this room too. Not just that room, this room. What's over here, Bill? Oh, that's my office. That's where all my books are. I want to be in there too. I want to be where you think and what you value and what you read and what you don't read. What's down there? Well, that's my bedroom. I want to be a part of that room too, Bill. What's below that's my attic. You don't want to go down there at all. I want to go down there, Bill. What's up there? It's my attic. Did I say attic when I pointed down? You guys don't tell me anything. You're so good. I'm thinking, that didn't sound right. And you're going, you guys are no help. He wants to go into my basement, and he wants to go in my attic, and he wants to influence all of the rooms. How I treat my wife, how I treat my kids. In fact, he takes me out of the house, and he asks me how I treat my neighbors, and who I am in my neighborhood, because he wants to set me apart by me setting him apart. So here's the hard truth. This one you can skip if you don't. You're not ready for it. I believe the more I watch people's lives, especially in this culture, after 50 years of ministry, as I watch people self-destruct, I have discovered that one of the principles laid out all the way through the New Testament has been minimized. I don't know if we've undertaught it or we're embarrassed by it or it's too hard to teach, but let me teach you some of this. Paul says, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. I am crucified with Christ. I died, yet nevertheless I live, but not me, it's Christ living in me. Paul says, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. In the New Testament, when you were baptized, immediately when you put your faith in Jesus Christ, they would immerse you. And the reason we have a baptism is to immerse people. And the symbolism of baptism is I am buried with him in death, raised to walk in newness of life. I died, and now the life that I live is his. Jesus says, deny yourself, carry the cross, and follow me. All the way through the New Testament, there is this sense that we are called to the lordship of Jesus Christ. That's the gospel. And we're going to look at this next week. The gospel is bigger than the plan of salvation. It isn't simply faith. It's faithfulness is in this gospel. And so we are asked to live different lives. Dallas Willard, if you want to read two great books that'll move you into a deeper faith journey, wrote two books. One's called The Renovation of the Heart, and the other one is Divine Conspiracy. And what he attempts to do is says this, that the Christian life will never work for you. It never works unless you submit yourself to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. Because your heart, your will, your soul, your emotions, if they're not aligned under His Lordship, you'll be out of balance. In fact, Dallas Willard says to the degree that you don't honor Jesus as Lord, King, boss, ruler, to that degree, you will extend your life into your physical rather than your spiritual, and then you'll find yourself in addictions. You'll find yourself behaving in ways you ought not to behave so that you can sense what you cannot feel. And the only protection we have as believers is to place ourselves in alignment so that He can renovate my heart. He can change me from the inside out so that I become a different person. Somebody says it's impossible for you to have Jesus living within you without some of Him leaking out. And some of us don't have Him leaking out. So what's the first responsibility in evangelism? For you to set apart Christ as Lord, to sanctify Him, to honor Him. Because when He is King, your life becomes radical. And here's the problem for most of us. Here's the problem for me. Our lives aren't radical. And they're not radical because our faith isn't radical. And our faith isn't radical because we haven't grown enough. And so we look just like everybody else. We act just like everybody else. We behave just like anybody else. So why would anybody ask us any question that makes us different? Because we look just like everybody else. That's why Peter says, set apart Christ as Lord of your life. That's the mandate. The mandate, the command is to set Him apart. Let's look at the second requirement. It's the moment. First is the mandate, second is the moment. But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. The moment. Always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. Now here's the beauty of Peter. Follow this now. This is great stuff. Peter, I'm going to step on some toes. Peter doesn't tell you to go and preach the gospel. He doesn't say, I want you to live under guilt, and you're always trying to figure out how to manipulate every conversation into a gospel conversation, and if you don't share Jesus with somebody today, then you're not a very good Christian, and then you manipulate all the conversations into some gospel presentation. And Peter says, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do. Set apart Christ as Lord of your life and be ready to give a reason for the hope that it is in you. What's he saying there? That the first question in evangelism isn't your question to your lost friend. The first question in evangelism is your lost friend asking you. That's radical. I get to just live life in all its fullness. And if my life is radical, and if Jesus is seeping out, then somewhere along the line, somebody's going to say, Bill, God, you got to tell me. You got to tell me. You got hope. You have cancer, but you got hope. You lost your job, but you have hope. You've been betrayed, but you have hope. Why the hope? Be ready always. What is he saying there? Big truth. I want you to be prepared. At any moment, at any time, if somebody were to ask you, what is the reason for your hope? What would you say to them? You are responsible to be ready. And I know most of us would look like deer in headlights. The first time somebody would ask us why we live what we live, we would... Because we're not ready. We haven't sat down. Have you ever sat down and said, why am I hopeful? What is my hope based on? How would I articulate, if somebody saw something good, something redemptive in me, what would I say to allow them to understand the basis of my hope? Here's the truth. I say this shamefully. I've only been asked one time why I have my hope. When I lived in Highlands Ranch, my house was as pretty as everybody else's house. My house had grass cut as evenly as everybody else's grass. My car was as nice as everybody else's car. And because my grass was cut and my car was in the driveway and my house was painted, nobody asked me until Karen and I took in a child born without a brain as foster parents. And for 8 months loved that child born without a brain. And for the first time in 8 years, my neighbor, a pilot for Continental Airlines, couldn't stand it any longer. And he came to my house and knocked on my door. And he said, Bill, you got to tell me. You got to tell me why you and Karen would take in a child for 8 months who was born without a brain. And for the first time, I could share with him that I believe that Jesus Christ has called me to a life of service and caring for those that are less fortunate. And I shared the gospel of Jesus Christ with him. What would you say if somebody asked you why you live different? What would you say if somebody asked you, why do you go to church on... I see you leave every day at 8:30. You look grumpy, but I see you leave at 8:30 on Sunday morning. And I see you and the wife arguing, but still, even though you guys are arguing and you're grumpy and you're pulling the kids in, I get all that, but every Sunday you leave at 8:30. Why? Why would you say it? What would you say that would bring them not to Table Rock Fellowship, but bring them to Jesus and expose? What part of the gospel message would you share as to why you come? But here's where it even gets better. This I love Peter here. Peter says, set apart Christ as Lord of your life and be ready to always give a reason for the hope that it is in you. Why is that powerful? Because it doesn't lead to an argument. If I say to somebody, Jesus is Lord, they say, no, he isn't. I say, Jesus is God, and they say, no, he isn't. And now we're in this debate, right? But if I say, Jesus is my Lord, they can't argue with me. They won't argue. Nobody has ever argued with me on that one. Jesus is my Lord. Okay? I can say hope is in salvation, eternal life, the forgiveness of sins, and they can argue whether that's hope or not hope, or if it's real hope or not real hope, or if it's hyperbole or truth. But when I say it's my hope, let me tell you my hope. They won't argue with me on my hope because it's my hope. That's the power of living out the truth, because now I don't have to go into a debate. I simply share with them the basis of my hope, my life, my Lord. And I can go there with them. And most people will live and converse with me if there's not hypocrisy or phoniness or religiosity in me, if they sense that I'm an authentic person attempting the best that he can to make Jesus his Lord. But set apart Christ as Lord of your life and be ready always to give a reason for the hope that is within you. What's your hope? Peter says a lot about hope in 1 Peter. Go back this week and read it. I hope you read 1 Peter more than 9:30 to 10:30. Peter says our hope is built on the fact that we have an inheritance that cannot be stolen. Peter says, my hope is built that Jesus Christ's death on the cross is sufficient for the forgiveness of my sins, the just for the unjust. We'll see next week in 1 Peter 3:18, the message part of it. Peter says that I live my life knowing that my hope is in a Savior who is now preparing home for me. Paul says my hope is in the fact that all things that are happening to me are happening for the good to those who love God. And in the midst of my suffering and in my pain, God will make good things happen, and therefore I can have hope. My hope is that when I stand in a long line at some location, I won't make anybody look bad, that I'm not as grumpy as everybody else in that line. My hope is that I've been there divinely placed, and maybe the conversation with this person or the conversation with this person will be significant. I don't know, but my hope is that my life is divine. In every moment of my life, God is involved in using me to be salt and light and good. And in that line, when everybody else is complaining on how slow it's going, I'm the guy laughing, talking to the two people on both sides of me. That's my hope, that God has placed me there and I have purpose and meaning. My hope, your hope. I'm doing a memorial this afternoon, and I'm going to say this at the memorial. I've said it before here. Aristotle was right. Plays and movies and books are either tragedies or comedies. And the difference between a comedy, Aristotle would say, a happy ending, and a tragedy, a sad ending. The difference in any movie is not how they start or what they're like in the middle, it's how they end. You never know if it's a comedy or a tragedy until the very, very end. And so here's the big comedy or tragedy of life. The hope that I have is at the end of my life, is death a dead end or is it a doorway? Is it over? And if it is, it's tragic. Because I've done too many funerals of 41-year-old beautiful women who love Jesus deeply and have 3 kids and have died of cancer. It's a tragedy. Unless death is a doorway into eternity. And then death becomes a comedy. Because it's just another part of an extended journey. That's what Peter's saying to these people. In the midst of your suffering, and some of you are going to die, but life is a comedy because it has a happy ending, because you have a Jesus who is your Lord, who has prepared heaven, who has told you whatever you've given up in this life, He will repay you 100-fold, and nobody can steal those things. And it changes everything. Third one, quickly, is the medium. Peter says this, but set apart Christ as Lord in your hearts, and always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that it is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. I love that. You know what Peter's telling us? You have no right to walk into any believer's life and go there without humility and meekness and reverence. That's how He wants us to live in a lost world. He doesn't want us to go into a lost world and be judgers and be critics and be holier than thou and be better than them. He doesn't want that for us. My son was 6-year-old, Jamie. We were driving. We're foster parents. Karen and I are in the front seat. Jamie's in the back seat. We had a foster kid in our car, a little girl. Jamie was 6. She was 5. I heard Jamie say to her this, "Are you a Christian?" And she goes, "No, I'm not a Christian." And my son's response was this, "You are so stupid, stupid, stupid." Jamie, you were doing so good until the end when you called her stupid. But I wonder how many people encounter our lives in our faith journey and feel that at the end of it we've called them stupid. I think we are called to treat them with reverence. There's no audacity to this. There's no arrogance to this. It's one beggar telling another beggar where to find the food. It's one broken person telling another broken person who can heal them, who can change them, who can make them better. Without love, 1 Corinthians 13 tells us we're a gong. Without love, when you encounter a lost world and you do not bring love, Jesus said, here, I'll sum up everything. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your might, and love your neighbor as yourself. There it is. Jesus said, if you're going to be known for anything, be known for your love. And when you move into a lost world and you do not demonstrate His love in you because He has become Lord, then this is what you sound like no matter what you're saying. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. That's what they hear. That's why Paul says it's a noisy gong. You're just another religious fanatic. But if you and I can find it within ourselves to get off the throne and say, Jesus, okay, you get to, I'm afraid. I don't know where you're going to take me. I don't know what you're going to do. I don't know what you're going to ask of me, but your throne, it's your throne, your king, and whatever you say, I will obey. You are not my servant, I am yours. I do not command you, you command me. And when you go there in the lordship of Jesus Christ, as Dallard Willard says, everything begins to align itself. And because you're aligned, transformation happens in you that won't happen unless He is king. And when that alignment happens and that transformation happens, something's going to leak out. Hope, love, truth, grace, mercy. Something has to leak out from that transformation from the inside out. And that's when you, in gentleness and reverence, with respect, you share your hope. But let me close with one last verse, which is the verse we're going to look at next week. Go to verse 18. Because I've communicated the mandate and the moment and the model, and here's part of the message. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that He might bring us to God, having put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. This is communion's verse. For Christ also died for sins, once for all, the just for the unjust, that He might bring us, introduce us to God. So we're going to celebrate communion. And if you choose, you can come forward in the back to take it. Go back to your chair. But here's what I want you to do this morning. For a few minutes, hold that. And I want you to recite or reflect on these words. Set apart Christ as Lord. And then we'll take it together. Let's do that.